we put our energy there. And I think I like to repeat again what Yolanda, and we can do only a little bit. But that little bit from the having behind United Nations organizations can be rather, okay.
To what you just said, because actually the next presentation we will have it in 10 minutes. When we did our survey 2 years ago to our members to put together the program of work that was presented in the last General Assembly, well, actually it was done 3 years ago, the main priority for our members, for our member states, was culture. And that was surprising. We didn't expect that. It was their main priority. It makes sense because if you want to have authenticity and you really want to have a unique product and you want to differentiate yourself, you have to get that. I mean, it has to be heritage, tangible and intangible heritage, cultural, and all those kind of resources. And then when we did the same survey to our affiliate members, it was number 2 priority. The first one was public-private collaboration. So it's really a hot topic, and the idea of bringing Clive Ruggles today to talk about astrotourism is that when we talk about cultural tourism, we need to land that in something that is practical and that can inspire us. That's just an example, but there are many others, and that's what we want to enhance when we talk about scientific tourism, to inspire ourselves in the scientific domain, and with that, to create innovative products and services. That's what I wanted to add to what you just said.
I think, just to add a little bit of my own, that if we want to build the future, to explore, as Don Hawkins said, to explore the future, but also to build the future, I think we should explore more carefully our links with science, with culture, with education. I'm spelling UNESCO, right? And others, also with health and agriculture, FAO too, right? But I think we should be doing that because perhaps we have been a little bit introverted in thinking that tourism was self-sufficient, all right? So when we think about the future, we definitely have to open our minds. But again, we are in closing, as Yolanda told us, that we have only a few more minutes, and it would be good to have a few minutes rest, perhaps even before the next conference. Yeah, are there any contributions? Ignacio, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you again. Considering that
to keep thinking ahead and not only trying to guess the future, but to build the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eduardo. I think the suggestion is that we have a pit stop for maybe 5 minutes or so, and then we come back for the final session with Dr. Clive Ruggles, who will be talking with us about archaeoastronomical tourism, this very interesting area. So 5 minutes pit stop, and we'll be back. Uh, can we repair to our places? Um, we have a very important session now, and then later, I think we have a dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the dinner will be a bit sooner because the dinner will be at 20:45, and the buses will be leaving the hotels at 8:15. Now we cannot be late, so we have
Right,
to
so we
leave
have to
here
start.
at 7. At 7, the buses will be waiting downstairs for those who are not staying at this hotel. We'll be taking the attendants to the different hotels, and then they will pick you up at each hotel at 8:15, and we cannot be late.
Right.
Yeah. So we have to end this session at 7, at 10 to 7 or something like that, sharp, because downstairs the buses will be waiting for you, for those who are not at at this hotel, to pick you up and take you there. Okay?
Okay. Can we be attentive and repairing to our respective areas so that Dr. Rogels could start his presentation? Thank you.
Okay, can you all hear me well enough? And can the translators hear me? Okay. So I'm going to address a case study that I hope will be of interest in the wider discussions that you will be having about science tourism and its relation to cultural heritage tourism. But before I start, can I just thank, first of all, the WTO and also our local hosts for actually the opportunity to come to this stunning country and to participate in this event. I'm testing the technology, which worked earlier. Okay. So this talk will be structured very simply in two parts. The first part about the opportunities and the second part about the challenges. Archaeology, the mystery of the past. Astronomy, the mystery of the universe that we live in. An editor at Scientific American magazine once stated that in every issue they tried to have at least one article on archaeology and one article on astronomy because they are the two most popular sciences generally. So if we bring them together in a thing called archaeoastronomy, then we are likely to be doing something that has great popular interest. I guess you would like to know what archaeoastronomy is. It's the study of how people in the past understood the skies. That's what we as academics do. So we are interested in people in the past, how they understood the sky, and because we are a type of archaeologist, we are interested in how that plays into the bigger questions that we as archaeologists are asking about people in the past. But what that means in practice is that our discipline is linking sites, monuments, and places to the sky through the things that we discover about the people who built these ancient monuments. And that linkage makes these places interesting. I am having real difficulty with this. Maybe you should advance when I ask you. Thank you. Now, one aspect of archaeoastronomical sites that is very well known in some cases is that some of them have rare, spectacular effects that just happen on rare occasions, usually to do with sunlight entering small spaces. For example, this zenith tube at a place called Xochicalco in Mexico, where the sunlight shines down a long, vertical, carefully made chimney just on those few days of the year when the sun passes directly overhead at noon and roundabout. An Egyptian example where the sun on a certain morning shines and lights up the figurine of a god. Here on the right is a rock carving. Maybe if you could dim the lights a little bit, you would be able to see these better. And the two of you front here really need eyes in the back of your heads. This, okay. A rock carving from the US Southwest, where a dagger of sunlight crosses the middle of the carving just the middle of the day, around midday, at the time of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. Here's an example I'll elaborate on, another from Mexico. It's a Mayan site. It's at the Mayan site of, oh, my operator has disappeared. Okay. Oh, okay, all right. No, I'm asking you to double task. It's not so good. Okay. So this is a Mayan site dating to around the 10th century in Mexico. You will see it's a typical Mayan pyramid, a large one, but at the end of the staircase here, you'll see two serpent heads. Next, please. And here you see them slightly larger. Next, please. And here, I just show this because I like this picture of a serpent apparently eating the tourist. Next, please. Around the middle of the afternoon, on the equinoxes, just on these days, sunlight falls across the pyramid in just such a way that it creates the body of the serpent to attach to the head. Next, please. Since this has been known for about 20 or 30 years, increasing numbers of people have come to watch this phenomenon. And I believe that now there are tens of thousands of people, maybe about 15,000, I think, who come here on the two equinoxes to watch this event. There is something about these special, rare sunlight events that people find very attractive and appealing. Next, please. But of course, sometimes these give us real challenges. Here is the sun dagger I mentioned earlier from the US. Now you see it in context. It's actually somewhere up here on the top of a very high rock crag. It's very difficult of access and very fragile, so tourists cannot be allowed to go here. So what has been developed, thank you, are various visual 3D displays in 2 or 3 museums nearby where people can actually do the visualization and see the sun moving at different times and see that effect. So there are interactive displays can make up for the fact that people can't go there to see the actual thing. Next, please. Here's a different example from Ireland. It's a 5,000-year-old Neolithic passage tomb. Huge thing, 60 meters across, and it has a passage that goes right down into the interior where the bones of the dead were laid. A 20-meter-long, dark passage, dark for virtually all the year, except for just a few minutes after sunrise around the shortest day of the year, the winter solstice. At this time, a ray of light passes through a gap above the entrance right in to the center. If you want to see this at first hand, I think you both have to pay a great deal of money and also wait a long time. I think the queue is several years long to see this. But what the authorities have done here, next please, is to create, well, not only a virtual tour, but also a device so that every group of tourists that goes inside this tomb, though groups of 10 will go in at regular intervals every day, they see this event, it's simulated using a light source outside, which is another way to handle it, so that everyone that goes there can at least get the feeling of how impressive that phenomenon is, even though the actual phenomenon is reserved for a very lucky few, as it has to be. Next, please. So there's one aspect of archaeoastronomical sites. Another is aligned sites, sites that are aligned upon places where the sun or moon or other things rise or set on the horizon. The pyramids of Giza, for example, are very precisely aligned north, south, east, west. And we believe that this was done by lining them up on stars rising around the North Pole in the sky. Stonehenge, you knew I was going to mention Stonehenge before long. Now, Stonehenge is aligned famously with the solstices, sunrise on the longest day, sunset on the shortest day. And English Heritage, who managed the site, have... Oh, I forgot this, just to say that, of course, where you have a structural alignment, and it's, thank you, aligning with some event on the horizon, if you cannot be there at the time, then you have to have something supplementing it to tell you about this. But you can still appreciate the significance of the alignment. Next, please. Stonehenge itself, English Heritage, and again, have grappled for many decades with the issue that tens of thousands of people want to come here and be at Stonehenge for the midsummer sunrise. Even in the 1950s, thousands of people came here. At that time, they used to crawl all over the stones and climb them. And various strategies have been tried over the years. In the 1970s, everyone was kept out with a barbed wire, and the only people that were allowed in were Druids. Now, modern Druids have as much to do with ancient Druids as ancient Druids have to do with Stonehenge, which is nothing. But it's a respect for the particular group of people that wanted to come and do their thing. There was a period when everyone was kept away, which got very problematic. And now people are allowed back in onto the site at these times, and it's very carefully managed. And maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people come every solstice. Next, please. And the third type of archaeoastronomical site, perhaps the most straightforward in one sense, are symbols, rock art symbols, where you have something that symbolizes astronomy. There are other problems with rock art, which I will mention in a minute, mostly we don't know what on earth it means. But here is one example where actually the meaning is pretty clear. It's from northern Mexico this time, and it's some sort of calendar tally which seems to span 9 months, is to do with hunting practices in this part of northern Mexico. And of course, this is there to be seen at all times. Now, Eduardo has also already mentioned astrotourism. I'm talking here about dark sky tourism. One form of astrotourism is where people go to places with dark skies just to appreciate the starry sky, which most of us don't get to see if we live in cities or in other populated areas. And there are many places now, there are internationally recognized and nationally recognized dark sky parks all over the globe, and dark sky tourism is booming in many places. The one thing I wanted to mention about this here, and of course it can be related, and often is, to astronomical observations. If there's a small telescope, people go to look at the stars, so they can do the actual astronomy looking at the stars, or simply they wish to go to dark sky places to appreciate the skies. And a number of places, for example in Britain, there are 3 or 4 small dark sky places where the tourist season is actually being elongated into the autumn very successfully, because people come at that time to appreciate the darkening skies. And it extends the tourist season to otherwise interesting places. The connection here is that some of these places also contain heritage sites. So this example is in County Kerry in the southwest of Ireland, which is an internationally recognized dark sky reserve. And one thing that is just being explored now is its connection with one group of monuments that you just see here. These are rows of 3 or 4 standing stones built in the Bronze Age. And we did, myself as part of what I do, a study of the alignments of all of these some years ago and discovered that they seem to be related systematically to the moon. And that is something that people are interested in exploiting here. If people are going to see a dark sky place, they will also maybe be interested in cultural monuments that relate to, in this case, the moon. And they can tie together the dark sky, the astrotourism, with some cultural tourism. Next, please. Now, archaeoastronomy has been discovering for many years now different types of monuments like this. I explained some famous examples, but there are many all around the world. If you're interested, there is in fact a 3-volume handbook of archaeoastronomy, which you can get from Springer, or you can get it online, and you can get chapters online. The actual hardback edition is horribly expensive, I must warn you, but you can get it online. And that, hopefully, we separates out the sensible archaeoastronomy from many of the less sensible things that are said. And it also points out many smaller sites that are less well known, perhaps even to the authorities in the countries concerned. Yes, please, oh, thank you. And the other thing that I'm involved in is an initiative jointly between UNESCO and the International Astronomical Union, which has now existed for 10 years. It's a thematic initiative within UNESCO on astronomy and world heritage. And what we're trying to do is to identify, safeguard, and promote astronomical heritage sites all around the world, and ultimately, hopefully, get a few of them recognized on the World Heritage List, and 1 or 2 already are. And of course, identifying and safeguarding sites is intimately connected with promoting them. It's intimately connected with managing them and managing tourism. The whole point is if we have a site that we want to be respected around the globe for what it is, people are going to want to come and visit it. And also it works the other way, but by coming to visit it, people are learning more about it and hopefully coming to respect these types of sites more, which helps us to protect and preserve them. So it most definitely is a two-way process. This type of world heritage is, yeah, thank you. That was good, forward and backward gestures, very good. This type of world heritage, it's not just ancient sites relating to astronomy, but we cover a whole scope, going right up to modern observatories and the dark skies that go with them. So it's a very broad range of this, and relates, of course, to heritage and also to tourism at different ends. Ancient sites connected with astronomy, modern sites and dark sky sites, which are more classic astrotourism sites. Thank you. And lastly, just to mention, if you were interested in this portal, UNESCO portal, astronomicalheritage.net, has information on about, I think it's about 70 case studies around the world. Some of them on the World Heritage List, some of them on national tentative lists ready to be put forward, others that are not yet recognized, just different case studies. Okay. Right, so there is potential in this. But I just want now to talk about some challenges because there are also challenges. Now, the first ones are obvious. I don't want to dwell on these. The obvious thing that there's crowd management, as I mentioned. In the case of dark sky sites, tourism, if you're not careful, brings lighting, and that can destroy the very dark skies that you're trying to preserve. So, I mean, these are issues that the dark sky tourism people are well aware of. Places like there's a Tekapo site, South Island, New Zealand, where they have a big dark sky tourism industry has started up, where they have tackled these issues extremely well. And that is a nice exemplar of how to work with these issues. Just one other little thing I wanted to mention that you may not have thought of in this context is that if you're talking about oriented sites, then especially if you are preserving the sites and improving them for tourism, you have also to preserve the orientations. One example, thank you, it's a group of monuments in central Portugal and also western central Spain. They're called antas, which is just the Portuguese word for dolmen. They're 6,000 years old, roughly, but there are almost 200 of them, and they relate systematically to the rising position of the sun. Each of these monuments, without exception, is oriented upon sunrise at some time of the year. They actually are the most ancient sites we know of around the world, with a very statistically demonstrable connection to the sun, between burial and the sun. They're important for that reason. And many of them now have become tourist sites because they've become protected, and there are both on the Spanish side and the Portuguese side, and there are various paths that you can go around in the landscape, many of them, of course, being on private land. But this was a little frightening episode I had. I visited some of these sites with this guy in 2005, Michael Hoskin, who was actually the person who, 20 years earlier, had been measuring them and discovered this trend. And we discovered that some of them had been very lovingly restored perfectly by the archaeologists and were now on the tourist trails. But we were frightened because this archaeological restoration might not necessarily preserve the orientation. In fact, we subsequently discovered that the Spanish authorities were totally on top of this issue, and in fact, this had been done very well. But it is an additional issue that even archaeologists may not be aware of when they are preserving these sites, but would be important if that's why you were getting people there. Next, please. Okay, so that's brought me on to something a little bit deeper, which I want to stress rather more. Challenging popular misconceptions. There are a lot of popular misconceptions about this type of monument. And in fact, some of these are also quite widespread amongst my academic colleagues in different disciplines. Next, please. So let's start with Stonehenge. Now, everyone knows Stonehenge was some sort of ancient observatory, wasn't it? And this goes back, thank you, to the 1960s. An astronomer, Gerald Hawkins, who said that Stonehenge was an astronomical observatory which pinpointed the sun and the moon. He sold 2 million copies of his book. And it's really the idea that his book embedded the idea in everyone's minds that Stonehenge was some sort of ancient observatory. The astronomer Fred Hoyle became involved and said that it could be used to predict eclipses. And actually, Hawkins said this too. And then is another one from the 1990s, a historian of astronomy, John North. And you'll see that all of these things show how many alignments there are upon the sunrise and the moonrise, with the idea that Stonehenge was some technologically sophisticated solar and lunar observing site. Next, please. The problem is that all this is actually nonsense. There are so many alignments that you can choose at all these sites that you can show statistically it's just nonsense. You can actually, if you work hard, you can make more alignments on the sun and the moon than they discovered. It's a game that is very, very dangerous to play. And also, many of these alignments involve parts of the site that were constructed hundreds of years apart. If you put the archaeology in, it restricts. We have to be very careful. So Stonehenge, in fact, wasn't an ancient observatory at all. Please. It did have this solstitial alignment along its axis, and actually, that's probably the only thing that we're really certain about in its astronomical connections. But actually, that is the basis of a very interesting archaeological story, which is what you will be told if you go and actually visit the place, to do with other monuments in this landscape. There are several monuments around this that are all solstitially oriented. We think it has to do with practices of people going to and fro in the landscape different times of the year in the calendar. Midwinter, midsummer, they had feasting at midwinter at a nearby site. All that is part of an archaeological story that is interesting in itself. And that's what we want to be putting over. But the idea it was some sort of ancient astronomical... Well, let me say more. The problem is that there are various parts of the world, Armenia included, as you'll see on here, where people have said over the years that they have their own Stonehenge. And you'll see here there's Germany, there's one in Romania, one in Macedonia, one in Brazil. There are several. Of course, this is predicated on a false idea about Stonehenge, and of course there are no cultural connections between these sites. But the idea is that these other sites also have astronomical connections, fine, but also predicated on the idea that they were ancient observatories. This is the problem. This whole idea of ancient observatories, you can look up ancient observatories on the internet. I think that's what I did and Googled it, and that's how I came up with this particular selection of sites. Yes, these sites generally have a connection to astronomy. For example, this site in Korea was some sort of pre-Buddhist sun-watching tower. This was a meeting site in Germany in the early Neolithic. It had 3 entrances, 2 of them solstitially oriented, 1 north-south. But it was a meeting site. It was not. The problem with the word observatory is that it implies that this place was set up specifically to do observations of the stars, like modern astronomers do. And that wasn't it at all. It's got an idea that people in the past were doing the same sort of stuff as we do. You know, we are modern astronomers. We look at the sky, or we're biologists and we do something else or whatever. But for people in the past, all these things were connected together. Sure, they had the same intelligence as us, exactly the same intelligence, but they had a completely different mindset. They looked at things differently. They integrated together. They understood things by making connections between things in the sky and things on the ground. Let me give you an example. Let's go back to Newgrange. You see it again there. Now, Newgrange was not an observatory. It was a tomb. People didn't go inside the tomb, you know. I wonder if it's the shortest day of the year. I'll just go inside this tomb and watch for the sun. It's a bit smelly in here. I don't like it. Oh, yes, it's midwinters. Of course they didn't do this. It was a tomb. So we must ask the more interesting question is, why did people who were building a tomb for their ancestors orient it towards the sunrise? And the answer is, there must have been some connection they were making in their minds between ancestors, ancestor spirits, and, ancestor spirits on the one hand, and the sun, the seasons, seasonal renewal on the other. And that's what Newgrange is telling us. It's telling us about something that was going on in people's minds in the past, how they were perceiving the world. And that's interesting. But it was not an observatory. Next, please. And here's another case. It's a site in Peru. I put this in because it's one that I was involved in the initial work on, together with a Peruvian archaeologist, Ivan Getzi. And this site is fascinating because uniquely in the world that we're aware of, it has a set of these 13 towers built on a hill, and a place that was clearly a priest's or special person's observing point, a place where we found archaeologically many special offerings. And from this place, these towers on the horizon exactly span where the sun rises in this direction now through the year. This end in June, that end in December. It's a sun watching device for sure. And in fact, it's interesting because this is now on Peru's tentative list, and we hope it's going to become a World Heritage Site very soon. It's unique. There are similar sorts. There's a similar site, except not on scale, in China, but it's discovered from the archaeology. It's not extant. So this is extraordinary. Yes, please. It's been billed by some as America's oldest observatory. that's not good, because that implies that this was all about just observing the sun. And it wasn't. There were plazas, there were ceremonies going on, there was music playing, there was feasting. And in fact, this is some sort of solar observation device, sure. It tells us there were priests or special people regulating this. It's related much to warfare. We know that because of the other archaeological stuff. We know it was a huge time of social turmoil. The point is that in starting to explain the archaeological stuff that excites me, I've already used 3 sentences here just to start to explain it, whereas Americans' oldest observatory comes straight out and it strikes you and people can say, ah! And that's the challenge, because this one, the one in red, is much more easy to explain and in fact has much more impact, but it's just plain wrong. And actually, it gets away from the really interesting issues, which are how people looking at the sun and things in the past, how that related into their culture. And that means that what we're trying to do is when people come here, they can come here because they're interested in observing the sun and the stars, and they want to see how people do it in the past. And then they come to see that there's all this fascinating archaeology, or they can come at it the other way round. It doesn't matter. But we're putting the two together, and there's real value added. Next, please. And finally, just at the end, so many sites have been called observatories in the past. This is the top of that zenith tube I mentioned earlier, but photographed many years ago. It's changed now. And you see there was this sign saying it's an observatory. That was quite commonplace at the time. But actually what's so stupid about this sign that it also tells people not to throw things down the hole. And you can imagine that every single child that's gone to this site over a 20-year period seen that. Oh, what a good idea. I'll throw something down the... Anyway, next, please. The last of the 3 challenges. So that was my main challenge, that challenge about not calling these observatories because they weren't. The last challenge is credibility, and this is quite important too. And I think some thoughts about this will have been occurring to several of you as I've been speaking. Next, please. Oh, okay. No, can you go back, please? So I show you this picture, and it's a very nice one. It's one of the Maltese temples. So a number of huge temples built in the 4th millennium BC on the island of Malta. And you'll see the alignment with the sun rising. I can't remember on which day, the solstice, I think. The point is that we can always find many alignments like this around the world, but just because they exist doesn't necessarily mean they're intentional. Everything has to point somewhere. And of course, there are various ways in which we convince ourselves as archaeoastronomers and archaeologists that things were intentional, but we have to be careful. There are many cases where we're not sure. With the symbol counts, things are even worse, because interpreting symbols is notoriously difficult. Just because you see a circle with some rays doesn't mean it was a sun symbol. Here we see counts of dots. This one, as I say, is the calendar is pretty firmly known. This one is actually also from Malta, a whole series of little dots. They actually correlate with the number of days between the appearance of a whole line of bright stars through half of the year. The correlation is impressive, and a lot of people, well, the evidence is quite strong that these were really counts of stars appearing in the morning sky, but the evidence is not conclusive. There is nothing to corroborate it. At the end of the day, we don't know. This is an even older example, which was claimed to be a Paleolithic, 30,000-year-old lunar calendar. And I think it's safe to say that no one really takes this interpretation seriously anymore for a number of reasons. So there are different levels of credibility, and we have to be aware of those in using this material. In fact, in the thematic study that we in the IAU did together with ICOMOS, UNESCO's advisory body, a few years ago, we investigated this. We came up with 4 general categories. Refuted. There are sites around the world. One example I give you is in Chaco Canyon in the US Southwest, which until recently was signposted as a depiction of a supernova. In fact, a supernova from the year 1054. If any of you know astronomy, you'll know there was one. The problem is that within a year of that interpretation being put forward, it was refuted because we have cultural evidence. We know what these symbols mean in terms of the Zuni culture who came there later. But that interpretation was still there 20 years later. There was a signpost saying supernova, and you could go and see the rock overhang. So there's a difficulty there. There are many unproven ones. The shadow, the serpent shadow at Chichen Itza that I showed you, well, it's fascinating, it's possible, but it's unproven. We don't know whether it's coincidence or not. There is no corroborating evidence. It remains actually a fascinating possibility. Whereas there are others that are debated or generally accepted amongst specialists. The one thing we never know is proven, because we don't have the people there to ask. So we can never say for certain, this is what that was. What we do is put together various aspects of the archaeological evidence in order to come up with whether we accept this idea as the best idea. And that's also difficult to put over. So we can't say this site was used for that, these people observed that because that. We can say they probably did, or we believe they did because. And that is a more subtle message that is a challenge to put across, but it's a rewarding one because it gets people thinking about other cultures in the past and what they were doing. And so I mentioned here, this is a site that's long fascinated me down in the south of Armenia, which I very much hope to visit and think we will be visiting in a couple of days' time. So it is an impressively large complex from the Bronze Age, Iron Age, of standing stone formations, walls and curves surrounding burial sites. It is claimed to be an astronomical observatory. Well, let's cast aside the observatory for a minute. But these claims have been very, very controversial. And I think what they have clouded over is the possibility that there are simple associations between this burial site and various astronomical phenomena. Not that people were looking through holes in the stones observing every star that you can think of, but rather that there were burial practices and that by just standing back and looking at the general form of the site, we will see that there were some connections, maybe to the landscape, maybe to the skies. And it's that sort of thing that can be put over. I think sites such as this not only remain sites that we will continue to investigate as archaeoastronomers, but also could be valuable tourist sites in the meantime, because we can not put these sites as solutions to the mysteries, but to the fact that how difficult but exciting it is to actually be asking these questions. So I conclude with just some general thoughts. The first one is an obvious one. I would rather talk about monuments and places connected to the sky. I think that's a good way to express it, rather than observatories. That's fine. Now, here's an interesting one. These sites in the past, they represent cultural innovation. Clearly, people are achieving amazing things culturally, sometimes uniquely. I would argue that in many cases they're achieving scientific innovation. I don't mean science in our terms. I don't mean modern Western science. I mean that people through all ages, at all times, try to make sense of the universe, the cosmos that they live in, that they know, by drawing connections between things. That's how you try to understand. Just like the Irish example, the connection between ancestors and the sun and seasonality. You try to understand things by making these connections. You have to make order in your minds out of all the chaos around you. Well, that's science, isn't it? That's what we do as modern sciences. We just do it in our own way. Next, please. Now, it seems to me from what I'm saying that there is a connection here. Science tourism, I haven't talked much about it explicitly, but as Eduardo was saying, science tourism is booming, astronomy tourism is booming. But I think through these sort of sites, there is a connection between science tourism and cultural tourism that we should very much be exploiting, much more than is currently the case. And I think that tourism is very important in that. When we talk about some of these ancient sites, what we're saying is that people in the past, essentially what they were doing, making sense of their cosmos, is no different from what we do as modern scientists. And I think that's an important point. Given that, I think what we're doing is recognizing, we're creating value that people around the world can recognize. I think one of the issues, with these megalithic observatories, so-called, was that people were thinking, this is our national monument or our local monument. We want it to be special. We want to say that the people who lived in this place, in our country, were intellectually fantastic in the past. Here, this megalithic observatory proves it. And the problem is that that's wrong on 2 or 3 counts. The first is that we're judging achievements in the past by this sort of yardstick of our own achievements in Western science. So we're saying, oh, this was impressive because they did this astronomically. And actually, what's impressive, because they all had our intelligence, what's impressive is that people were thinking up different ways of understanding the cosmos. This is human diversity, people in the past in different places. And that's what's impressive. And it's that can be recognized. You don't have to be part of that culture to recognize that. So I think getting away from this observatories towards this sort of more general connections, these cultural connections, helps us to recognize value that's evident to everyone, which, wherever they're coming from, looking at these monuments. That's important for us for World Heritage, but it's also important for global tourism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Clive Ruggles. I think that was most exciting, as it was in fact enthralling and had the attention of all of us. The final item for the afternoon, which is getting into evening, is the open debate on cultural tourism. And it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Olivier Mesmer from the Smithsonian Institute to lead this session.
Okay, I guess I'm the lucky speaker today. I'm having the 6 to 7 session, so my challenge is going to keep you awake for the next hour, hour and a half. I'm going to try my best. Okay, I was in Georgia maybe a month ago, like 2 weeks ago. The format was no presentation, so I came very unprepared. I don't have a presentation, so I'm just like put up some pictures of Armenia, our host country. I think it would be good for all of you to have some pictures in the background of our wonderful country, Armenia, and I'm going to be speaking while the pictures go on. I'm not sure if you're ready with it. Okay. So how do you feel? Nobody's sleeping yet?
Coming out of the dark.
Who went to the wine festival in already? Just raise hand. How many of you?
Didn't get a chance.
Okay. How do you feel today? Good? Lucky I was at the wine festival also. I know it feels like, even a couple of days later. So if you fall asleep, no problem. I won't be offended. Okay, so the picture are going to come. Perfect. So my name is Olivier Mesmer. I am the country director of Smithsonian Institution here in Armenia, and I'm in charge of the implementation of the My Armenia Cultural Tourism Heritage Program, a collaborative project between USAID, Smithsonian Institution, and the people of Armenia. Maybe some of you are familiar with Smithsonian, but maybe some are not. So I wanted to give you a little update on who is Smithsonian. So we are the world's largest museum institution in the world, research complex, The institution counts with 19 museums in the United States, the National Zoo in Washington, and 9 research centers in the United States. The Smithsonian collections include more than 138 million artifacts, work of art, scientific specimens, and our museums in the United States attract more than 30 million visitors per year. The Smithsonian works overseas in 130 countries around the world, promoting cultural resilience, conserving biodiversity, studying and supporting our cultural and natural heritage. The My Armenia program, which I run here in Armenia, with its emphasis on boosting tourism in Armenia rural areas, is one of the many initiatives implemented by the US government over the past 2 decades to support rural economic development in Armenia, and underscores USAID's strong and enduring commitment to partner with the Armenian government in growing Armenia's economy. The partnership between Smithsonian Institution and USAID is the first one of its kind, and it's happening here in Armenia. The My Armenia program aims at strengthening cultural sustainability through community-based tourism development. Building on Smithsonian expertise in research and curation, and partnering with local academic partners, for example, the Institute of Ethnography and Archaeology from the Academy of Science of Yerevan, My Armenia program conducts community-based research in destinations throughout the country to identify and document Armenian cultural heritage. Building on this collaborative research and working with the Sustainable Tourism Development and Marketing experts of Solima International, My Armenia program will increase and share knowledge about Armenia cultural heritage while identifying opportunities to enhance and increase community-based tourism to rural areas. Presently, Armenia's tourism market is relatively narrow and untapped, and the economic benefits of tourism are concentrated in the capital city and a few outlying areas. Most tourists who visit Armenia tend to stay in Yerevan and venture outside the capital city for day trips only, resulting in limited economic growth opportunities for local communities. The My Armenia program will ensure that the economic benefits are widely distributed throughout the country and will aim to demonstrate the productive relationship that occurs between culture and economic development. The demand for cultural tourism, as most of other tourism segments, has evolved past years. Cultural tourism has switched from sightseeing of tangible cultural sites to experiencing intangible cultural heritage. Thus, destinations that position themselves on this segment need to upgrade that offering by developing experiences and interactions between the visitors and the cultural champions of the country. Culture and tourism have a mutually beneficial relationship, which can strengthen attractiveness and competitiveness of countries. Culture is an increasingly important element of the tourism product, which creates distinctiveness in a crowded global marketplace. At the same time, tourism provides an important means of enhancing culture and generating income, which can support and strengthen cultural heritage, cultural production, and creativity. Creating a strong relationship between tourism and culture can therefore help destinations to become more attractive and competitive. In order to address the challenge of developing cultural tourism in Armenia, our program intervention has been structured under the following 5 pillars that will drive our work for the coming 4 years. Pillar number 1, research and storytelling. Identify and document unique cultural heritage of the destination and develop creative content, narratives, multimedia, photos, videos, 360, virtual reality, for example. Building on the large experience of Smithsonian in storytelling, and I'm going to show you an example in a minute, My Armenia program will develop inspiring content of Armenia's cultural heritage which will be used in a later stage for developing tourism products, developing guide training, and marketing collaterals. Second and next pillar, developing tourism experiences. First of all, identify the cultural champions in the country and assist them in developing tourism products that will allow visitors to experience unique cultural practice and interact with the communities. My Armenia will work with private enterprises and individuals, museums, foundations, NGOs, which aim at developing and promoting Armenia's tourism. The program will either help local stakeholders to develop new products or to strengthen existing ones. Next pillar, training the cultural champions. Artisans, musicians, dancers, wine producers, cook, amongst others, might be very skilled in their respective art, but they need some guidance and training on how to interact with tourists and share their traditions with visitors. My Armenia will work closely with local communities to provide guiding and interpretation training courses specifically developed and based on the uniqueness of the cultural heritage of each target destination in the country. Pillar number 4, celebrating the culture, and I think you've all been celebrating Armenian culture this weekend. The wine festival in Arani, the Gata festival in Khashik, the barbecue festival in Akhtala are also good opportunities for communities to showcase their traditions and attract visitors to the destination. My Armenia will work with festival organizers throughout the country to help improve the overall festival experience for visitors, increase community engagement during the festivals, and assist with market access. The fifth and last pillar, packaging the experiences and promoting the unique cultural assets of the destination. Building on the content development, the experience development, and training of local workforce conducted in the previous phases, packaging and promotion of the unique cultural heritage of Armenia will lead to raise awareness of Armenia as a cultural tourism destination, increase the number of visitors, generate economic growth to cultural champions, thus sustaining culture globally in the country. The marketing and promotion efforts of the program will target both the individual market, independent travelers, domestic travelers, diaspora, as well as the travel trade through inbound operators in Yerevan and the international tour operators. Finally, and before I finish this short presentation, I wanted to share with you a few words regarding the Smithsonian Folklife Festival. Every year since 1968, Smithsonian is organizing a festival on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. For almost 5 decades, the festival has presented more than 30,000 musicians, dancers, artisans, cooks, and more from over 100 countries and regions around the world. The working theme for the 2018 edition is creative and cultural industries. And I'm happy to announce that we are planning for the participation of Armenia in 2018 festival together with other countries. Now I've finished my short presentation about the project. I think the debate that will follow will be on cultural tourism, which is a very wide theme. Before that, I wanted to show you a small video because I've been talking about the Smithsonian storytelling. So I would like to show you what it means on a video. So if you would take 5 minutes to watch the video, and then we can open the debate. This is the lavage baking. If you will heard about lavage baking, right? Does that remind you anything you saw on Saturday? Good. Now awake. Okay, so I noticed the UNWTO affiliate really wanted to have a debate on cultural tourism. So I'm happy to be the one moderating this session right now. I don't know, I mean, honestly, white tourism, we could be talking about it for hours. I don't know what specific theme you want to be speaking on. I think that there is an important theme that I really in my heart is, I would say cultural tourism obviously is an evolving segment. It's been a fast-growing sector in the tourism industry. I guess you're all aware of that. If you want to have numbers in terms of number of visitors or billions spent per year, my colleagues can surely tell you these numbers that I don't have in my hand. But it's amazing how cultural tourism is becoming such an important sector for the tourism industry. Now, I would say as any other tourism segment, or even any like economic sector, cultural tourism is evolving. It's evolving because the demand is evolving. And when we think about this new generation of travelers, and I'm talking about the Y generation or the millennial travelers, there are people that are demanding cultural tourism, but in my opinion, the demand has changed a little bit. And I see on one side certain countries that are positioned on the cultural tourism segment that are adapting their offering to that new demand. And on the other side, and that's a little bit my challenge here in Armenia, because we're starting to develop tourism here, I wouldn't say from scratch, but pretty much. So we want to be sure that we come up with a product offering that's going to meet not only the existing demand, but the new one, and I'm talking about this Y generation. So I don't know if you want to start debating about this topic, which in my opinion is very important, but how do you envision that demand evolving in terms of product offering, training that could be provided to the tourism stakeholders, to the supplier of tourism in countries? Maybe we could start with that. I don't know if that's a topic that would inspire the audience. Let's see. Not really, actually.
Use the microphone for the translators, yeah.
Okay. It was just a little point that occurred to me because I had never thought before about this interaction between intangible cultural heritage and tourism. But starting from the point that intangible practices themselves change, they're not fixed, ever. And I think that's just how it is. And putting that together with you starting to talk about people adopting their offerings in the view of tourism, it just seems to me that what we should be talking about here is an interaction. Right, it's not a one-way, it's not tourism going to see these practices which are somehow fixed and being shown to us, but inevitably, right from the word go, it's about interaction. And it just seems to me that that has to be part of the thinking about, well, all the thinking that follows. That's all.
I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, definitely, I think that these new tourists, of course, you go to a country, you want to experience like cultural tourism, you want to sightsee, but also that interaction that some countries or some communities are able to provide is definitely a plus into the offering. And I believe that the demand is evolving that way, and I believe also that it will continue to evolve that way. So that's why I think that cultural destinations need not only to be able to showcase what they have in terms of like culture, being tangible or intangible, but being able to involve the tourist into it, where you actually take part of it. So this is, for example, with the lavage, which is one of the few intangible heritage that is UNESCO certified here in Armenia. And you see that pretty much around the country, and I think it's very successful when the tourists come and they get to see this lavage baking, like in houses. They can actually play with it if they want to. And that's how they not only learn about that heritage, but they do it themselves. I mean, you have also like lavage cooking classes that are being offered in certain places. And then when you actually eat that bread, it tastes just like 10 times better because you made it. And that's really the point of it. And I think in craft also, which is another component of the program that we'll be working on, it's also something very important, where craft is not only like displaying like nice object on a display, but is actually having workshops when like tourists can like first see how craft is being made eventually they can experience like having like sort of just like craft classes when tourists can take part of it, start like playing with either being, I don't know, like wood making or iron making. They will do it very badly, but still, I mean, just like taking, like trying to do it, first they are going to recognize how difficult it is to do it, so that the final product that is sold by the artisans is going to get more value, because you realize like the tradition, like behind the craft tradition, how difficult it is. So at the end, when you actually try yourself to do something, this is when the chances of actually buying the product gets higher. And you're also probably willing to pay a higher price for it, which is another issue that we have in the craft sector, like the price point. Excuse me, yes?
Hi. I just wanted to address the comment from over there. I'm also working on this project here in Armenia with Olivier. And one of the most interesting parts of what we're doing here, for me at least, is that we have these researchers going into the field and doing these assessments. So what we're able to observe, and then it's our job as well to create written pieces and stories that kind of bring these narratives together in a way that can be accessible to people, not just from an academic standpoint. But what's really fascinating is seeing the way that these intangible cultural heritage has actually evolved, and in such unique circumstances, in ways that are not necessarily at this moment. It's not a narrative that maybe is extremely attractive in the most touristic sense of the word. And for example, you have this 70-year interruption in much of this intangible cultural heritage transmission from generation to generation. And one of the most interesting things for me was very recently when I was looking for my next story to write about. I was looking through we have a fellow who's gone into the field assessing all the craftspeople in these various regions. And I'm looking through her work, and it says she has to tell us, you know, where these skills were learned. And so much of these skills, these craftspeople are learning self-taught, this is very, very interesting, because it's this narrative that's promoted in what you want to be the touristic setting, and that you want to have this ancient heritage that's been preserved until now. But this is reductive, and what we're able to uncover here is, okay, so we have this narrative now that's not in line with that, with this ancient, you know, culture that's been preserved until now. It doesn't follow that narrative, but it's a new narrative, and how can we reconcile them in a way that's ethical? And so I think that's what's interesting about this project as well.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. I've been looking for you all day, by the way. Yes. I've been Facebooking about you too. But anyways, I think the professor raises an interesting point. Everybody's talking about you too. About the issue of intangible heritage, and it's changing over time. In Jordan, we have this large tourism program, and I presented only a snippet of what we're doing. But we have also worked similar to what you're doing here on also intangible heritage and tangible heritage. So we work on sites, but also what we've noticed, and actually when we looked at experiences around the world, people are changing the way they consume travel, and especially in cultural heritage, when you can go see a site, but you can experience it, and when you experience it, the benefits to the local economy multiply manifolds. And this is where, when we look at developing a cultural site, we look at the gateway community, the communities that are around it, and you start linking it, what type of authentic experiences you can provide. And studies show that spending by a visitor can go up to 6-fold if you start providing these experiences. So from handcrafts, not just selling, but actually making. So you can take them to handcraft shops and have them participate in it. Or maybe cooking the food, like you say. But also, while heritage can change, and it does, one of the things we're working on is bringing it back, or bringing the visitors back in time. We have the Roman site of a city called Jerash. It's 2,000 years old, one of the best Roman cities that is still preserved around the world. So what we're doing is we're doing a recreation or a reenactment of the Roman chariots and the gladiators and so forth, and it's quite interesting. Site entry is $7, but the show itself, after you enter the site, is about $20. So this is just a single activity. And you could speak about a multitude of issues. You know, we have a coast city we're working in called Aqaba in the Red Sea, whereby we're starting a fish food experience. In Petra, then you make a different sort of experience, and the crafts change and so forth. But I think the issue of intangible heritage is quite important, and one of the initiatives we're working on now is to research Jordanian food that was cooked hundreds up to a couple thousand years ago, and can we find these recipes from books, from poems and otherwise, and bring them back and train people on them and start serving them to the visitors.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point. You actually open up to my second topics that I wanted to discuss today. It's like community engagement, because at the end of the game, I mean, if we're doing cultural tourism development, and especially intangible heritage, which is owned by the people, the question was more like, how do you engage communities into sharing the tradition, and how do you maximize the economic growth or the opportunities to the communities? Because again, I mean, those tourists, they go to destinations like outside capital city, they visit communities, communities make the effort to develop products, to be trained. So obviously they have to receive a certain income, like economical benefits, and this is when we tie culture with economic development, and that's the sense of our project, the partnership between USAID and Smithsonian, is really bringing that interaction between economic development and cultural sustainability. So how do you engage this community into sharing this tradition and actually making a profit from the tourist visit? And on the other side, and this is something that we've seen in so many destinations, unfortunately, is how do you intend to develop cultural heritage while preserving that culture in the same times? Because this is something that we've seen in so many countries, that your strategy might work at some point, and you have like thousands or tens of thousands of tourists that would go to a destination to see a specific cultural heritage, maybe talking about the Maasai, for example. And because of that flow of tourism to that destination, the culture get changed, get altered, and then it loses, I would say, its authenticity, so it loses interest to the tourism sector. So it's like the snake eating its tail or something like that. So at some point we have to balance, and whenever we develop, I would say, culture in the destination, we have to be very careful of maybe strategy or policies that have to be in place so that you don't cross that line. Because when you talk about cultural development, you have to talk also about cultural sustainability. So I don't know if some of you have worked in other destinations of like maybe best example or bad example as well that you want to share with the audience, but that's something that really we have to keep in our top of the mind for future development, and especially here in Armenia, because we're just starting.
I think the last point that you raised is a very important one, especially when you look at terms of people who want to go out and experience authenticity and to go back in time. And as Ibrahim was referring to, going back to the days of the gladiators and the chariots. But at the same time, and you don't have to go back that far, but you have people who might be seeing these people coming in. They don't want to be like in a zoo, but they're also looking at moving forward as well. And I think that's the balance, is how do you make sure that that culture is valued, treasured, preserved, and they're receiving something from it, but at the same time, you know, they're susceptible to change as well. You referenced the Maasai, but you also look at the Amazon tribes that have lived without a lot of human contact. But now when you see 20 years later, people have gone back in, and I mean, they want Western culture, and they want their MTV and Nike and Coca-Cola as much as we want to go back and experience the simpler days.
No, you asked for a case. I can give you a case study from Hawaii that I have some knowledge with about the Hawaiian navigation, where most of this knowledge was lost, but over the last 40 years, a group of people called the Hawaiian Voyaging Society have recreated Hawaiian star knowledge, much of which is historically based and based on stuff that we've done, but also have created new star knowledge, which some of which they have taken from modern astronomers who told them this, and then they have put it in traditional terms. And then they have built traditional voyaging canoes, and they have one going around the world at the moment. So in one sense, it's a living tradition, and it has borrowed, well, some expertise from Micronesia on the navigating by the stars they didn't have, some stuff coming from modern astronomy, and also, but the whole thing is done in a sort of traditional way, and it's all done in traditional Hawaiian terms, but you know, there are layers of modern invention on the history. And I was asking people once about how they reconciled this, and essentially they came out with a short little saying in Hawaiian, which basically means from the way past comes the way forward. And the idea was that what makes the tradition going forward, it's the tradition going forward makes the historical tradition relevant, because you need to know what you can about the past in order to make the modern one relevant. But it also is going to evolve forward. So you kind of need the historical tradition to justify the modern one. Otherwise, there's no cultural aspect to it. But at the same time, there's a two-way feedback. I didn't explain that very well, I'm sorry, but yeah. I stop, I'm rambling.
I mean, I think this is a really interesting point as well, having this historical basis, but also really accepting it on contemporary terms. I think one example that I've found since joining the team in Armenia, we ventured into Lori region to find artisans and speak with them and get to know them. And one of the people whom we met, we ventured into this Soviet factory, this old Soviet factory. I mean, there's many of these in Armenia, and this one is very rare in the sense that it's actually still being repurposed. It's still actually in use in some ways, not in its original setting, but it's being used in different ways, repurposed by the local community. And blacksmithing is actually it's a cultural heritage in Armenia. And I mean, I know that there's a very historic element to this craft, but in Soviet time, this also took on new meaning with the factories that were blacks using iron and steel, and as a blacksmith, this was very, very, especially in the Lori region, was very common and harnessed. And so we saw one small corner of the factory being repurposed by a local blacksmith, and he created like some little pieces of, he created like leaves for us from old metal rods that he's repurposing from these countless heaps of old metal in the factory. I mean, this was a really unique touristic experience. And not just, I mean, you're not just feeling this as a tourist, you're feeling this as you're experiencing the merge of histories in that moment. It's like an older history, it's also a 20th century history, and it's also a history happening right in front of you. I think Armenia can, I think with the right kind of, I guess, people involved and parties involved, we can really harness that in Armenia. It's just a matter of dealing with these histories in a way that's not essentializing them, not reducing them, and again, in a way that's ethical. And I think Smithsonian is one of the, I think that the resources that the Smithsonian has to ensure that there's this research element to it really highlights that. So I don't know if that answers. I think sometimes anecdotes can help to put things in perspective. But I agree with your point, is what I'm saying.
Several weeks ago, we had a conference in Georgia, and we had a very interesting delegation who went to learn and share, their experiences. And we were able to highlight, some of the innovative approaches that were used, particularly in the major wine-producing region of Kahiti. And over a period of just 5 or 6 years, with the use of competitive clusters, collaborative efforts. We found that some of the events that were created, for example, they had an international Kevri symposium. Kevri is the ancient winemaking process. It's been going on for several millennia. Really began to get Georgia, on the tourist map. But we were, engaged to find ways in which we could operationalize trip circuits. And we evolved those circuits around wineries and also around cultural heritage and also natural areas. And I think this concept of circuit development, route development, engaging, with local tour operators is very effective. But at the same time, we found out that many of the places that were attractive from a cultural heritage point of view need a restoration, renovation. They needed water supply. They needed, parking, toilets, et cetera, et cetera. And all that kind of came together. And fortunately, we were able to navigate through the World Bank system, a $60 million loan, and that was added another $15 million by the government. And that same model under a rural development approach in Georgia is now being adopted and developed in 4 other provinces, and maybe another 3 or 4 left to go. But one of the conclusions that came out in our discussions with the Armenians, it would be really good if we could get the connection between Armenia, and Georgia. At a conference a year and a half ago, we came up with a kind of an approach to develop multi-country destinations, particularly to tap into the long-haul markets. It seems to be Armenia, Georgia, with the kind of products and services and trip circuits could be a very, very effective way to reach the longer haul markets. Right now, Georgia and Armenia, to some extent, is benefiting, from regional tourism and emerging domestic tourism. But I think it's important to also appeal to the international markets. And I think you do that through the routes, development, engagement of tour operators. But that doesn't mean that we ignore the needs of local people. Through the National Geographic Society for the last 9 years, we've been using ways in which local people could nominate places that they'd like to share with visitors. And this has been kind of an online platform. And in some cases, it leads to a map or at least to a website. But the most important thing, it gets people working together. We have this whole concept of co-opetition. I mean, we want competition, but we got to get cooperation. And we get cooperation when people work together. We found the most effective method was creating events like the wine festival, that we went, or celebrating those that already exist and helping them and facilitate. Because most of these local small operators see each other as competitors. And the moment any money starts floating in, they're in a negative stance. So you've got to find ways in the earliest stage of getting to work together, to collaborate, to cooperate. Thank you.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. I mean, we came to Georgia maybe 3 weeks ago, and
Yeah.
it was only me with a couple of my team members, but we actually brought 8 winemakers from the region of Irene. These are the people that have showed the most interest, I would say, in Armenia to develop wine tourism. Armenia is a winemaking country for centuries, but it is not a wine destination, unfortunately. So the idea was benchmarking mainly because, again, even myself and even more the winemakers of Armenia was like, okay, we want to develop wine tourism, fine, but what is it about? So we had to sit with our eyes and see like successful examples of wine tourism development in order to believe for it in Armenia. And what we saw in Georgia, I mean, just a couple of facts that just comes to my mind. I mean, first of all is how quickly a destination can position itself on that segment. Like by talking to the tourism people of Georgia, I learned that Georgia started to promote wine tourism maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, and then came to the level that it is today. So I'm like, great, we're going to be here in Armenia during 4 years with the Smithsonian program. So we can make a difference. It's not that we're talking about something that people would see benefits in 20 years. Like if we start working now actively on developing wine tourism in Armenia, this can be actually effective by the time we finish the program in 2020, or at least see some like good positive impact. Secondly, in terms of like wine offering or like wine tourism offering, I had in my mind that successful destinations were very creative in terms of like type of product that they could supply to the tourism industry. And I found out not only with Georgia, but also the other speakers that came to the conference a month ago, like the Spanish that came, the Argentinians, Japanese, like any of those people. Basically, I mean, what is being offered is nothing extraordinary. I mean, it's always more or less the same product, wine tasting, visiting the facility, like walks or like hiking or horseback riding in the vineyards, that kind of product. But there is nothing extraordinary that we can't do in Armenia. And again, I mean, when I saw about the difference, because, I mean, you could do wine tasting in Armenia, don't get me wrong. I mean, if you go to Areni, you do have a couple of like options for you to do wine tasting. But it's basically like you get to a facility, you get a nice table, you taste your wine, eventually you want to buy a bottle, and you step out. And that's like a 10 minutes experience. And what I saw in Georgia is all the setting that was put together around the wine tasting, which made a whole difference. I mean, first of all, the location. When we went to that winery, which was like a tunnel, so you're like inside a tunnel, and you have this like nice table settings, and there was some typical Georgian music. There were some people with like traditional dresses that were serving you the wine. And this is what's making the whole difference between just a standard, I would say, wine tasting and like an experience. And as a tourist, when you have all those things like put together, this is when you actually have a tourism product that appeals to the market, and not only the domestic market, but like international markets. When Don talks about this co-competition, is that the right word? I like this word actually. This co-competition, this is more than ever the case between Armenia and Georgia. I mean, of course, there is the like regional market that counts still a lot for Georgia, because I think it's like 80 or 85% of the tourists come from the neighborhood countries. But I mean, for Armenia and Georgia, if they want to attract this international market at some point, the one that goes beyond the region, talking about Western Europe, the United States to some extent, the Asian markets, I mean, putting the two countries together, and they are pretty much a similar, I would say, offering, when wine tourism is definitely one of them. Cultural tourism is another one, if you want to see culture besides wine. But I mean, Georgia and Armenia have both like a huge, I would say, ancient history. So packaging and marketing the two countries together, this is when it makes sense, and this is actually how it's being sold to the international market, that people that would travel, for example, all the way from the United States or all the way from Japan to come here in the Caucasus, they want to see something other than just Georgia or just Armenia. So this is when you package the region, it's this like 2 weeks tour, putting these different themes together. This is when you can be successful in tapping into those markets. So I truly believe into this regional, I would say, cluster, where country would start working together into offering this regional package. And of course, Georgia and Armenia are two of them, but we have to look also at Western Turkey, we have to look at Azerbaijan, eventually also to Iran whenever it opens up. But this is like a whole package that could be attractive for people that come from far away, because I don't imagine like someone flying all the way from the United States just to come and spend like a week in Armenia. I mean, this is very long to come, this is very expensive, unless it's like an Armenian diaspora, which is what we get here in Armenia. But like a standard tourist with non-Armenian, I would say, roots, I don't see him coming just to Armenia for a week. So this is when this regional, I would say, cluster makes a lot of sense. So I saw a finger somewhere while I was talking. Did I see a finger? Okay.
Hi, Russ Hedge from the International Youth Hostel Federation. My question goes to a topic that you mentioned earlier, which is the Y generation, which is a segment that I think we all, to varying degrees, are trying to understand. And I've got a comment and then a question for you. Our hostels operate programs for millennials that are designed to introduce millennial travelers to local cultures. And we found it to be quite a puzzle. We found that they are not immediately attracted to this concept of cultural heritage, but they are attracted to this notion of getting involved with the local community. So it's all about, it's less about the label and more about the experience, and it's getting them to take the experience. I guess my question then is, what is your experience in terms of how we can attract millennial travelers to whatever activity we're engaged in?
It's a very good question. I wish I could answer it fully. I'm still studying it. I mean, my experience is that, as you're saying, I mean, the interaction is definitely what attracts the millennial travelers. Secondly, I think in terms of pricing, and that's something I realized actually when I was working in Morocco, which was the former country I was before coming to Armenia, is that millennial travelers, obviously, because it's like this generation born in the 80s, they have a buying power which will be less than, I would say, older travelers. And it's pretty significant. What I've noticed in Morocco, and it was very interesting, is that they tend to be willing to spend less in hotels. Like they'll be willing to do like homestays, the bed and breakfast experience, whereas with other markets it's getting more difficult. And they are willing to spend a much bigger proportion of their budget into activities. So if you sell them like a tour, let's say like $60 or $70 to do like a day experience, something very inspiring, being with the community, interacting, learning something, they'll be willing to spend that money. But when it comes to lodging, they're going to say, I'm spending $20 maximum, for example, just to give you a range. So this is also very interesting for the tour operators, or also for like service provider, how they package their product and how they promote it when they tap into this Y generation, to be also very careful with the price limit, because they don't have that much of budget when they travel, but they do travel often, and they do have, I mean, a certain buying power. I mean, not of course all of them, but certain of them, but then you have to be careful into how you present your products. So I don't know too much about what you're offering, but again, I think that in activities, I wouldn't say there is no limit, but there is a lot more flexibility in terms of budget, whereas the lodging is what they're going to be saying, yes, like $20 max, because they want to save for other things.
Okay, I'm sorry. Here's the list.
There was an issue with her translation. I mean, I don't know if I'm a fair representative of the millennials. I am one, but I don't know how many of us there are in this room today. One of the things, so I noticed that there was a presentation about hostels today, this hosteling, which I was happy to see. I think one of the things, I think this is an interesting glimpse into what, I mean, again, I can't say that I'm representative of every millennial, but this is my experience, and I'm, you know, one member of this generation that has done quite a bit of traveling and am living in a foreign country now. And hostels are so appealing because they are so no strings attached. I think that's one of the things that this fear of commitment really characterizes the way that I kind of travel. I don't like to commit to things because everything is changing so quickly. Like once it's printed, it's out of date, right? So one of my fears is that, you know, we might be investing too heavily in this, you know, package tour deal, because it's just not very cool for like people in my generation. If I have to be totally blunt about it, for example, you know, there's this really underground travel guide that's made its way in the underground travel circuit, and maybe the people in the hostel industry will know about this. It's called Use It Travel Guides. And they are so amazing. I mean, it is like you can just get the recommend. It's crowdsourced from locals in the community, and I would really like to see this project go in this direction as far as you know, harnessing the voices of locals and not necessarily dealing only with people who are based in Yerevan as tour operators. It's really important to get into the regions, which is one thing I'm happy to see about this project, is that we're really focusing efforts on driving people into the regions, but I'm also, I also want to make sure that we don't, you know, bring it back to Yerevan with the tour operators, because they're all based in Yerevan. So it's about providing incentives for people who are actually living in the regions and keep them there and get people from Yerevan to go there without the tour operators.
Yes, thank you. I am representing the most important cities, tourist cities in Europe. European Cities Marketing is the association who gather the most important cities in Europe. And in addition, what she has mentioned, I think that all this debate about the cultural tourism related to heritage and also intangible heritage should be complemented with something in relation to what she has already mentioned about the values of the destination, about what the people who are living in cities, in this case, lives and the way of living. And I think we have a big challenges from the supply side and for the demand. From the supply, to put in value, to evaluate and to remark the convenience of absolutely being aligned with the values of the local destinations. Cities are being crowded and crowded, from Hong Kong to Los Angeles, from Prague to Venice, and the relationship between citizens and tourists is a must, and we must be very careful with that. And as a second, I think that we also have a big challenge in how we transmit to our clients, to our visitors, to our tourists, the fact that we have every city, every destination has a very different way of living. And I think it's a big challenge. Thank you.
Hope that we have covered most of the areas, given what our timeline is.
Well, we could talk about communication also with the Y generation. I think that's a point I missed to mention when I answered your question. But something also that differs is, I mean, when you look like maybe 15 years ago, the all-inclusive package, like very cheap, was what was on the market, and that was very successful. And we see the trends that is going down, and especially this type of product do not appeal to the Y generation. And as Karine, because I think Karine is actually a good representation of this Y generation. Oh, you're leaving already? Okay, I'll see you tomorrow in the office. Is that this Y generation, they want to feel free when they visit a destination. So this like concept of like all-inclusive or all package, where you know what you're going to be doing during your entire trip from the day you're in the country until your last day, may not suit this market. Whereas, I mean, the like statistics tends to show you that they like to take this plane ticket, get to a destination, and why they're in the destination by talking to people, by looking at reviews, like Facebook is playing a huge role, like any kind of social media, like TripAdvisor, not to mention the most famous one, is where they would get the information from. Like before, I think our generation, we would trust the travel agent that's like down at your house, that you would go there, he would tell you, you have to go to this hotel, you have to do this and this and this, and you would trust him. And now, this new generation, they don't trust the travel agent anymore, not as much as we used to trust them, and they trust more like TripAdvisor, because you will see those reviews of customers, and you're gonna see this hotel has got like a 9.5 rank, seems like I trust this hotel, I'm gonna go there. And the same actually applies with activity, where like whatever is being recommended through the package is not necessarily what people feel like they should be doing, but they rather widen country, talk to people, and then based on whatever recommendation they would get from the locals or from actual tourists, which has even more value, they will make the decision of like how I'm going to keep myself busy for this week I'm in this country. So communication is maybe a huge topic. We could be talking for another hour. I don't know how much time we have. But oh, we have to finish already. Okay, maybe the next one, the 39th session.
While we're at it, we've spent a lot of time on this very important area of cultural tourism. And in the discussions, it seemed very clear that the vast number of small and medium tourism enterprises would fall within this general rubric of cultural tourism, the community-based tourism activities, the small stakeholders. Indeed, 80% of global tourism is driven by small and medium enterprises. And I think that what is missing, perhaps in our networks, is a specific network dealing with these small and medium enterprises, which are the bedrock of tourism across the world. And perhaps out of this discussion, we may want to suggest that an added network relating to cultural tourism with specific reference to community tourism be developed, and that we spend some time looking at how we can assist the private and public sector arrangement to build out a stronger small and medium tourism enterprise structure across the globe. This is very important. We in Jamaica, if I'm allowed to use an example of my own, have been doing that as the basis of our new thrust to drive the supply side, because we are satisfied that the inputs of tourism are essentially these values that are provided by the people within the community. And so we think more effort has to be put and more funding arrangements have to be structured. I just put in to the Exim Bank in Jamaica $1 billion Jamaican dollars, which is perhaps not a large amount in US, but in our situation it is quite a bit. For the small and medium entities, these little people who do this, what we call the street food, and who does handicraft. And they are bringing a key value to the destination and building a new experience that are sought after by all varying demographics. And the very millennials of whom you speak are driven by community-based activities and rural activities. So I think we've done well today. We've had a very deep and wide discussion. We've come cut across all the various areas, including the distribution network within the industry. And I'd like to thank you very much for this intervention, as I want to thank all the participants and the presenters, Professor Luis Moutinho, Clive, he left already, Professor Eduardo, and I want to thank everybody for a very lively and vigorous contribution to a very, very first day of plenary and general interventions. Bless you. We close now to go on to dinner, and Yolanda will tell us what arrangements are being made for the evening. Or Adaya? Yes.
Hello. So our very gracious Armenian hosts have prepared a beautiful event, so we kindly request that you all be on time. The buses will leave at 8:15, so please be in your hotel lobbies, your respective lobbies, at 8 o'clock. Please.